What is happening, guys? Welcome back to Redbeard's Garage, and on today's video we're going to be answering the most asked question on our YouTube channel, which is what parts fits the Duromax 18 horsepower 440cc engine. So we get this message all the time in emails, Facebook messages, and on Instagram. What parts fits my Duromax 18 horsepower engine? Today, we're going to be breaking down this 440cc engine, and we're going to be finding out what parts from Go Power Sports actually fit this thing. Now, I've built plenty of these, and I already know what Gx390 parts fits this block and what parts do not. So we're going to go in depth, disassemble this thing. We're going to test everything out, and we're going to also show you guys how we test to make sure we're telling you the right parts fit your engine. So laid out, we have carb, we have a cam, valve springs, we have some rockers, we have a billet rod and a billet flywheel with starter ring gear. So let's get right into it, break down this engine, and show you guys what parts you need to buy. And before we get into the video, I want to answer another question, which is why would I go with this over a 420cc Predator? Now, in my opinion, you're paying about the same price for a 440cc engine as you would a 420cc Predator. So in my opinion, I would much rather go with a Duromax engine. And another reason is it's basically you have a 420 that's already bored out with a bigger piston, and that's where you get the main differences. You also have a 10-bolt side cover on this engine that is a lot stronger, and they do make a billet side cover that fits this. So you're not going to be able to use a Gx390 side cover on this because it does not have 10 bolts. The bolt spacing is a little longer on these engines too, because the block is all around a bigger, stronger block. And that's the reason I always tell you guys, if you're asking me what big block to go with, I will always say the 440cc engine until something else comes out that's better. The 459 doesn't have any aftermarket support, and I really don't think it's going to. Basically, they got rid of the crankshaft bearings, and that's a huge disadvantage to me. So I like that this still has the bearings. It has a splash lubricant system that works. We've proved that that worked with over 300-hour race engines, and just wanted to answer that real quick. This is my favorite big block to run with because I know it's tried and true, and she puts down great power. So let's break down this block and get to testing those parts. So the spark plug is going to be the same exact spark plug as a Gx390. So if you like to run the auto light or the platinum style, you're going to use the same exact spark plug. This particular spark plug is an LG F7RTC, and this is a good just stock spark plug, but if we get into performance parts, I like to use an auto light plug. You can also see that the valve train is exactly the same as a Gx390, so if you have some ratio rockers, they will work in this. The push rods for a Gx390 will work in this just fine, and also the valve springs. So you can go with 50-pound springs if you're just removing the governor, and if you run something like a 308 cam, you're going to want double 65-pound valve springs. All the links to these parts will be located in the video's description. So to test for our flywheel, I'm going to clean the crankshaft of any kind of debris left over from the original flywheel. You can see the blackness. I'm using some Blaster brake cleaner. Use it on everything. So if you don't have any Dicom formula, you can use Sharpie actually. So what we're going to do is just take a Milwaukee ink saw or a Sharpie, and we're going to color this entire taper area of this crankshaft, because that's what the flywheel is actually seating onto. So with our key out and our crankshaft taper all Sharpied up, or like I said, you can use Dicom. It is located in the video's description. You can click show more and it opens up our description, and it has every part that works on these engines, and I'll kind of break down everything down there. But now we can slide our flywheel on and then twist it just like we're lapping the valve or lapping the flywheel, and it's going to scrape this coating off and show us how much of the taper is meeting on the tube. And that's already grabbing a ton, so that's telling me the tapers are matching. It actually is deburring. You can see that material, it's cutting off some burrs that was on the aluminum, so you can see how much of that crankshaft it's meeting, and that is what you want to see. So basically, this billet flywheel, this is part number 6623. This is for a Gx390, works perfectly fine on a Duromax 18 horse 440cc engine. This is confirming it live on video, so you can see how much it scraped that paint off, and that just proves to us that this is the correct taper. Now since we've tested that, we can clean this off because we're not going to lap the flywheel just yet. We're going to wait until I reassemble the engine to do so, but I can get all that Sharpie off there. That's a quick and easy way to test your taper. Now I will say that once you check the taper, you cannot send that flywheel back, so make sure you're buying the correct parts. Again, 6623 is the part number for the flywheel on a 440cc Duromax. So now we can get inside the block to pull that crankshaft out and our camshaft to see if the Gx390 parts matches those as well. Now one thing about the Duromaxes is they glue their side cover on as well as use a paper gasket. So you're definitely going to rip this gasket taking this off. So you need to make sure you buy a 10-bolt side cover gasket. Again, those will be linked below. Now we can pull out the balance shaft. We can pull out our camshaft, and we'll be measuring the lobe diameter and depth on both sides of this here in just a little bit, and matching it to our 308 cam for a Gx390. Pulling out our lifters. I'm going to go ahead and pull out the oil sensor, and what this does is there's a ball bearing in there that rolls. If this thing flips over, that ball bearing rolls and grounds that out. That's why we take them out if we're running them on a cart. This is only meant to be there for like a log splitter and a pressure washer. We say this all the time, and some people get so mad that we unhook those, but it is literally only there if the engine was to tip over on its side. It doesn't do anything else, and if you have a go-kart and you're turning curves hard and stuff and jumping it, it will shut off the engine. So definitely remove that. Now this piston design is not the best in the world for horsepower because it has the dished shape to it. So you're going to get a little bit less compression out of this style. So we like to put a flat top piston in them and bump up the compression a little bit, because the dish is, you know, there's quite a bit of dish to this. So that's one easy, cheap upgrade you can do, is a flat top piston. Sometimes the bearings will come out with the crankshaft that's in the back of the block. That's a common thing, so don't worry if that happens. And it seems like this one's going to be that engine that does that. Yep, so we just hit it with a rubber mallet and it came out and the bearing is on there. It's no big deal. We can actually just leave it on there and insert it all back into the block. So now we can test for rod oil clearance, and that's basically how much room you have in between the journal and the rod for oil to get in there and lubricate. If we don't have enough room, you have too thick of a bearing, and if you have too much room, then that means you need to go with a bigger bearing. Every new engine I've ever run, I never have had it out of spec. But if you're using an old engine, then there's a good chance you could be out of spec and need to replace your crankshaft or get it polished. So if you're checking the oil clearance for your bearing on your rod, you need to make sure to clean everything off of the crankshaft journal. Make sure all the oil is off of it so you're getting an accurate reading. Now you can use plastic gauge, and that's the way I've shown it in a ton of videos, because it is a cheap, effective way to see how much clearance you have for oil. Another way to do so is a cheap set of calipers. You can get a set of calipers for 15 to 20 bucks on Amazon. I have linked some cheap ones as well as a really nice pair down below in the video's description. But we're going to use calipers today just because it's even faster to show the numbers. So with the ARC rod, you're going to have a piece of paper that's going to tell us our clearances. And if you look at the bottom of the first page, it says we need to be at 1.4167 plus or minus 0.0005. Make sure our calipers are zeroed out, and then we can grab our crankshaft, check around, and you want to also check several spots of this crankshaft. This is reading 1.416. Perfect. And that is dead in our spec. So we're going to check this in several areas to make sure, and it's checking out, because some of these can be ovaled. So this reads perfect for this rod, so that means we can use the Honda Gx390 rod in this engine. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and break these bolts loose. These are, you can use an 8mm 12 point or a 5/16 12 point. I find that an 8mm actually fits it a little tighter. So real quick, we're going to compare the two rod caps. You can see the stock one has a really narrow oil dipper, and this is what dips in the oil in the bottom of your crankcase and slings it around your block. So this is really inefficient. They work, but at higher RPMs, this is not going to supply the rod bearing and other areas of the engine with sufficient oil. So you can see the whole breakdown of that rod cap. Now with the billet one, it's got an actual scooper that they've milled a hole in that rams oil directly to the bearing, and that's why these billet rods are so good, is because they are forcing the oil into the bearing. The rod is the same way. It has a hole to let the oil come back out, and it can sling back in and get in there. So it's a really awesome awesome design that they've done on this. Super nice part. So the next thing that we got to test is our piston wrist pin size, and make sure it matches our new rod. So what we're going to do to remove the rod from the piston is there's a little notch cut right here, and that's how you're going to get the clip out. I take a small pick and I get under the clip, lay my finger over top of it, and just pop it out like so. You can grab it out of there. You only have to remove one side. So you also have to worry about the orientation of the rod. You can see this has what I call the long gear of the rod, and that matches the same side as the arrow on the piston. So make sure you get that, the new billet rod placed the same way. I'm going to slide the wrist pin out through the hole that we popped the clip out, and then we have our rod removed. It's an I-beam style rod, but it's just, you know, like cast aluminum, and they're decently strong, honestly. Where they fail is the friction that comes in here with no insert bearing, and it's aluminum on steel, so of course the rod's going to wear, and with heat it'll eventually seize up. And I keep these for paper towel holders. They're pretty handy. So now with our billet rod, we're just going to dry fit our wrist pin, and you can see that is like perfect snugness. There's no, like, you can't wobble it. It has no friction going across, it just slides super smooth. And you see how slow it falls out if you was to tilt it. And that is dead the same wrist pin size. And get our billet rod installed. And we're going to want to use assembly lube on all of this before fully putting it back together. As you can see, this Honda rod works perfect in this piston. So one place you may get interference with the rod is this windage tray. You're going to want to remove a good portion of it just to be careful. You can install everything to see if you have any clearance issues, but normally one of the rod bolts will get in contact with that. So you can use a set of pliers and snap it off. A good set of pliers, you can just snap that piece of aluminum off, or if you want to be real good, you can tuck some paper towels in here and Dremel it off. You just really want to thoroughly clean your block as much as possible. So I always just go ahead and remove this windage tray just so I know when I put it back together I won't be pulling stuff back apart. Okay, with the cam journal sizes, that's our most important thing, is what the two ends of the cam measure out. This is the stock original cam. We're going to do the same thing with our calipers and turn them on, make sure they're zeroed out. And we have 0.623. 0.623 on that end. I'm assuming they're normally the same. 0.623. So that's what we're reading on our stock cam. So now let's grab the 308 cam. So here we have our new 308 cam. This is my favorite cam to run in big blocks. Has a ton of power, a wide power range, and it is 0.623, 0.622. You know, it's going to fluctuate between a thousandths of an inch, but you can see 0.622 there. So that means this aftermarket cam is going to work perfect in our big block engine. Of course, we already know this because we've been running these forever. So now we can reassemble it, and we'll look at the exhaust port and the intake port to show you guys that normal Gx390 parts work on it as well. Now, typically on these engines, I like to leave the balance shaft in because it does help to knock down on the vibrations. But if you can notice, we're not going to be able to do that with the 440, because if we spin the engine around, we have contact with not only the rod bolts, but the dipper smacks the balance shaft. So we're not going to be able to leave the balance shaft in this engine, which the only thing it's going to do is allow it to vibrate a little more. The thing's going to vibrate anyways because this balance shaft is only really designed for 3,600 RPMs. So if we're revving this to 4,000, then of course we're going to get vibrations anyway. So unfortunately, we will have to remove the balance shaft on a 440 if you're doing a billet rod. It's the only way to get the proper clearance. Another thing that's really handy to have if you're building engines is to buy a spare side cover and cut it apart like I've done this one. So what I've done is I've left a bolt hole on each side as well as the dowels. There's a dowel under each of these wings here that I've left that help to dead center this. If you don't leave the dowels, then you're relying on the imperfections in the bolt holes to line it up. So you want to definitely leave the dowels. So leave a wide area here. And on this particular one, I also left the journal for the balance shaft because some blocks you can run the balance shaft, but this one I was going to have to shave too much material off the balance shaft, and then that balance shaft wouldn't be balanced. So it's pointless leaving it in there. And this will rev a little quicker without it. It's a lot of mass that you're taking out of the engine, so it's going to perform better in some ways and less in others with the balance shaft removed. But you want to run this side cover, like basically torque it down. I do 18 foot-pounds on these side covers, and then you just want to spin it around, make sure you're not getting contact with anything. And then what I like to do is push the rod side to side, the cam all the way to one side, rotate it around, pull the cam, because there is a very light amount of play side to side in these cams. So you want to make sure you're not hearing no clanging and banging when the rod gets right beside the cam. So we just topped off the engine with Amsoil Break-In oil, and this is the best stuff because it has high zinc formula already in it. It's a heavier weight for the break-in cycle, and how we break these engines in is we run them up to temperature a few different times, and then we just start hammering on them, and we've had really good luck like that. So we do a break-in oil change after about 10 hours or so. So a couple hours of that is just getting up to temperature. If you really, you're investing a lot of money in this engine, so you want to take care of it, and I highly recommend using Amsoil. I've done a lot of research on them, and they seem to be the kings of oil for sure. And what we do is run the break-in oil in the break-in cycle, and that's going to add zinc to those bearings and stuff and help everything break in properly. And then once we flush it after anywhere from 5 to 10 hours of light use, then we use their Dominator racing oil shown on screen. I love this stuff. I'm an Amsoil guy for life now. Absolutely love it. And these magnetic dipsticks that we've been using forever, these are for a Gx390. They thread right in the 440 blocks, so you can use the same Amazon links for those, and this is going to capture any sediment that gets broke from the engine and capture it on that to keep it out of your rod bearings. Now, one thing that is different on the 440s is the head gasket. Because of the bigger bore, you can't use, this is a standard Gx390 or 420 head gasket, and the problem is this lip is kind of overhanging the bore just a bit, and this is the original head gasket that came off this. I'm not going to be able to reuse it because it did peel apart. Now this has a fire ring, so it's probably okay to reuse it, but I just want to know this engine is going to perform at its best and last us a long time. So Vegas Kart sells these head gaskets. They're for their 460s, because a 460 has the same bore, just a little bit different stroke than a 440. So that's how they're getting 460 cc's out of it, is it's basically a stroker with a bigger bore than a 420. But unfortunately he doesn't sell the 460s anymore. He just sells replacement parts, so I'll have to order a head gasket. And I keep about 4 head gaskets because I build so many engines, and I keep 4 10-bolt side cover gaskets as well, because that's the main key differences. Is the bolt pattern on the block is a little bit longer by about 3/4 of an inch, but it'll still work on standard engine plates. The head gasket is different, and the side cover gasket is different because of the 10-bolt extra strength that you get out of these side covers. So all in all, this is a better block than a 420 any day, and that's why we use them. So now we move on to the cylinder head. Now if you're installing a Mikuni, you're going to want to pull these studs off, but we're going to use them to show you that the Go Power Sports Gx390 or 420 intake works. This is what you would use if you're running a Mikuni. So if we lay that on there, you can see that it's fitted perfectly for this port size. So no problem using 420 carbs. You can use the jet kits from Go Power Sports, an air filter adapter on the stock carb. Everything like that works. And if we move over to the exhaust port, Go Power Sports also sells these exhaust flanges, and it actually could be opened up just a hair, but bolt pattern wise it fits exactly on there. What I would recommend doing is centering this and port matching it. And if you're wanting to do performance modifications to your head, it's good to port out the exhaust, open it up, clean up the curves and transitions. And I wouldn't open up the intake that much. I would just clean up the transitions and the sharp corners and really bevel those out. We'll do a video later on head porting and what I found that works. But for this engine, we're just going to be putting it back together with a Mikuni, and we're going to be installing Go Power Sports double 65-pound valve springs. These are what you're going to use for a 308 cam. This is going to help not get valve float, and they work awesome in these engines. And since this is just more of like a stage 3 engine, we're just going to be using the Champion style rockers in this engine. It comes with rocker studs that's going to thread into the original pedestals in the head, and then these will slide right on and put the nut on and adjust them out. Also, the stock push rod length we can measure and to see what off-the-shelf push rods are going to work. Now with these Champion rockers, you will have to measure for push rod length because it can change with different style rockers. If you're using ratio rockers, you really need to leave the stock valve springs in it and install your rockers in an adjustable push rod so you can run it through and find the exact length you need. But you can use the GX300 cut the length or standard size push rods in this engine. And we measured these in a set of calipers, and these are 6.5 inch long push rods stock, and that is if you're going with the stock style rockers and want to just put some chromoly ones in it. I have some cut the length ones here, so off camera I'm going to measure. We have a full video showing how to measure for push rod length to get the optimum amount of travel out of your valve, so you're getting all the money that you're spending on that cam and all that lift. You can make sure you're getting all the lift you possibly can. All right guys, so the last couple of parts I want to talk about is the coil packs. We sell on rbgcarts.com small block and big block MSD style coil packs, and what this is a brand new coil. We put a 8mm Speedway wire on it with an MSD connection. So this is going to give you a little bit harder spark. We're not saying that it'll give you like a ton of horsepower or anything, but it's a better quality setup than the factory coil. It looks cool, and it also comes with a grounding strap shown on screen, and what that is going to do is ground directly to your coil in the bolt that holds it to the block, and then ground to an extra bolt hole on the head. And this is going to allow grounding to get right beside the spark plug to give you an even harder spark. And let's face it, it looks sick, and it's going to give you a little bit harder fire. So you can use a Gx390 coil. These coils that we sell for big blocks will work for all the big blocks, 420s, 440s, 460s, and Gx390s. So we do have these on rbgcarts.com. And the last thing I want to talk about is the flywheel starter ring gear. Now, if you buy a flywheel, you can buy one with a starter ring gear, and it looks like this. And it's basically an aluminum ring gear that bolts on these bolt holes on the back of the billet flywheels, so you can use the factory electric start. Well, the problem is with this on 420s or 440s is this does not work. So basically, once you sandwich bolt this on, it should be about 1/4 of an inch further out is the problem with it. So we have a laser cutter right now cutting us a spacer for these. So once that is available, you could buy a starter ring gear and you could sandwich this basically a 1/4 inch piece like a washer for this to space it out. Because right now what'll happen is we've had them actually work, but they're grabbing the very corner of this gear, and it'll eventually, since this is aluminum, it's going to strip that off. The starter needs to kick out 1/4 inch more. So I think that's the easiest fix, is to laser cut a sandwich plate to go in between this and the flywheel, and then you can sandwich it all together. So just to recap on this entire process, the Gx390 flywheels, rods, and cams, the valve springs and rockers, push rods, all work on this engine. The only key differences is the head gasket is different and the 10 bolt side cover, and that's pretty much the only difference. It is a little bit bigger block, but it's not like you're going to be able to tell just looking at it. It's going to look like the same as a Gx390 or a Predator 420. But this is our favorite engines to use, and we thank you guys for watching today's video. I hope this helps you out in your build and helps you find out the parts that you need. We have linked everything down below, and they do help us if you use those links to continue doing these videos. We thank you guys so much for supporting us. Thank you Go Power Sports for sending these parts out to test, and we hope we answered some questions for you guys, and we'll see you on the next one. We love you, and God bless.